Is Trump a true ally to Israel? There are impassioned views on both sides. One side says yes, his recognition of Jerusalem, his support for Israeli sovereignty, the Abraham Accords reshaping the region all prove that strength and clarity deliver results. The opposing view says no, that Trump's embrace of Israel was more show than strategy, that it undermines bipartisan U.S. support and ties Israel's fate to volatile American politics. What looked like short-term wins, this view argues, came at the cost of long-term plans. The question is urgent. Is Trump good for Israel? And Open to Debate takes that one on tonight in partnership with the Council on Foreign Relations.
This is Open to Debate. I'm John Donvan here in New York City, produced in partnership with the Council on Foreign Relations. The Trump Doctrine, a global reckoning. Each debate focused on Donald Trump's breaking with precedent in the conduct of foreign policy and the implications of that. This one looks to the Middle East with two debaters who both want the best for Israel, but who disagree on this question. Is Trump good for Israel? So I'd like to welcome our debaters to the stage. Please welcome Einat Wilf and Jeremy Emmy. I want to point out that you are both returning debaters with us. It's delighted to have you both back again. And I just want to take an impromptu 45 seconds to acquaint people with your personalities and who you are. And I'll start with you, Jeremy. One of the interesting things about you is that your dad was really a player in the history of the state. Can you tell us briefly who he was?
So my father was a member of the Irgun, which is the right-wing freedom-fighting force. He was a close friend of Menachem Begin's. He was a very hard, dyed-in-the-wool right-winger. He was sent to Vienna to run Jews out of Europe in 1937 and 1939. He was in charge of an illegal immigration operation. And then he ran guns and arms and people to the pre-state, to the Irgun, which was the force that was fighting from the right politically. And so he did that in 47 to 49.
And then he came to the States?
And then he came to the States.
And settled?
Yeah, it's a long story, so we only have 45 seconds. I won't bore you with the details, but he was in and out of the States. He ended up getting married, ended up fighting in the U.S. Army in World War II, got citizenship that way. So it's a good story. I plan to write it up one day.
All right, thanks. And Einat, you have an interesting story as well. You were a member of the Israeli Knesset. And people have a very hard time. We've met before, but I did some reading recently, articles about you. They feel they have a hard time pinning down what your political persuasion is. Talk a little bit about that.
It's a good thing, no? Yeah, I grew up in the Israeli Labor Party, the Israeli political left, very much believed and supported every Israeli prime minister, leader, that pursued peace based on the formula of land for peace, truly believed that the only thing that was standing between us and peace was a Palestinian state, Palestinian control of territory. And I have lived through the complete collapse of that premise, of that hypothesis, ultimately researched, wrote books about it, to realize that fundamentally and unfortunately, the Palestinians, to their credit, have always told us what they wanted from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free in Arabic, Arabs, so free of Jewish sovereignty.
I will stop you there because
that's what I thought. I was like,
you're getting into your argument already,
you
but you're talking about having had a journey in your perception of
absolutely.
This. All right, so it's good to know you had that journey, and we look forward to hearing your arguments. But in fact, you're going to be the first person speaking in our opening round. Our opening round is comprised of opening statements by each debater in turn from their lecterns. They get 4 minutes to do that. Einat, you are up first. As I mentioned, you are a former member of the Israeli Knesset, the parliament. You're the author of several books, including the co-author of The War of Return, How Western Indulgence of the Palestinian Dream Has Obstructed the Path to Peace. And as I've mentioned, you're a former debater with us. Welcome back. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So during the years 2016 to 2020, I remember I always struggled when I had to meet with Americans coming to Israel. And I always told them, look, I have at least the benefit. Whatever is going on in America is going on in America. As an Israeli, I can tell you that the Trump policies in the Middle East are exactly right. I don't know if it's instinct. I don't know if it's foresight, but he got it right. The recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, the defunding of UNRWA, closing down the PLO offices, recognizing Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. All of these actions had the cumulative effect of basically sending the message that was needed to be sent a long time ago to the Arabs in general and the Palestinians in particular, which is, it's over. Your war that you have waged for the last century, initially to prevent and then to undo the establishment of a Jewish state, in that war you lost. You can live next to a Jewish state, but not from the river to the sea, and move on. And his actions had the cumulative effect of sending that message. And it's not a coincidence that he ended that 4-year term with 4 peace and normalization agreements between Arab and Muslim countries in Israel, and there was momentum for more. The Biden administration, as soon as it came in an act that I believe was juvenile foreign policy, distanced itself from the one clear success, refusing for a year even to call the Abraham Accord such, basically kind of killing the momentum, refunding UNRWA, no strings attached, basically re-indulging the Palestinians in their vision. And it's no coincidence that the Biden administration ended its time with a massive, brutal attack on the Jewish state, guided by that vision that the Jewish state is now weak and it could be finally gotten rid of. Now, look, like many, I don't know right now what is happening. I have my fears, I have my hopes. But I do know that fundamentally, in the things that he says, in the actions that he takes, from talking about releasing the hostages or all hell would break loose, the message that should have been on October 8th, and yet everyone was like, no, negotiate with the butchers. The message that all hell will break loose. The message that there are consequences to attacking and invading a fellow nation. Those are the kind of things that can finally lead us to peace. Because at the end of the day, the only reason the conflict has been going on for a century is that every time that the Arabs in general, and the Palestinians in particular, waged a war with the declared goal of annihilating the Jewish state, and they failed, every time they got a redo. So if you keep telling a people, try again, try again, try again, they will try again. And now finally we might have a president who will tell them, it's over, move on, you can live next to the Jewish state, but not on top of it.
Thank you, Einat. Jeremy Ben-Ami, you are president and founder of J Street. It's an organization here in the U.S. which aims to promote Israeli democracy and a peaceful solution between Israel and Palestine. Prior to being with J Street, you worked in politics, you worked on presidential campaigns. You were a deputy domestic policy advisor to President Clinton when he was in the White House. And you, as I said before, are also a former debater with us. So welcome back, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, John. So our topic tonight is what makes a president good for Israel? It begs that question. If Trump is good or Biden is good, what makes a president good? My premise is that a president who is good for Israel takes actions that enhance Israel's security and helps the country to provide a homeland for the Jewish people and remain at the same time a thriving democracy that respects the rights of all who live there. That's my definition of what it would be to be good for Israel as a president. President Trump's policies and his track record, not only in his first term, but in these first 100 days, undermine all of those goals. Here are 6 reasons why Donald Trump is bad for Israel. 1, Donald Trump does, in fact, seem to be determined, as Einat has said, to be the president who kills the idea of an independent state of Palestine living next to Israel that would provide Palestinians with freedom and self-determination. If he succeeds and Palestinians don't have freedom and hope, then Israelis will never have security. Because right now there are more Palestinians than Jews living between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And if you green light Israel's claim to all of Jerusalem, to the West Bank, and to Gaza, and eliminate the idea, the chance of a sovereign state for the Palestinians, then Israel cannot remain a democracy and provide all of its people with equal rights and remain a state of the Jewish people, and that is bad for Israel. 2, bipartisanship has always been a key to American support for Israel. Donald Trump consistently politicizes support for Israel. He paints Democrats as anti-Israel. He makes Israel a wedge issue in U.S. politics. He and the party he leads are undermining bipartisan support for the Jewish state, a key element of Israel's long-term security, and that is bad for Israel. 3, the steps that he has taken, defunding Palestinian aid, shutting down the mechanisms to provide food and medicine, proposing to end U.S. training of Palestinian security forces, supporting Netanyahu's inhumane blockade of Gaza. One after another, this president's actions are deepening Palestinian despair and the humanitarian crisis. Starvation and hopelessness won't defeat extremism. They will inflame it, giving Hamas and other such groups more fodder for recruitment and propaganda, and that is deeply bad for Israel. 4, Trump's anti-democratic behavior here at home, refusing to accept election results, attacking the judiciary and the free media, promoting authoritarianism, all of these provide cover for Netanyahu and the extreme right to do the same thing in Israel and to implement their own plan to undermine Israeli democracy. If Israeli leaders see what's happening here and they say it's okay because America's doing it, we can do the same thing here, that undermines the fundamental vision of the founders of the State of Israel outlined in the Declaration of Independence to have Israel be a liberal democracy and not an authoritarian state. 5, a weak and globally disrespected United States is bad for Israel. In 100 days, Donald Trump has done more damage to U.S. standing globally than any enemy state has been able to do in our lifetime. His erratic and unprincipled approach to global affairs and the deterioration of the standing of the United States in the world is not good for Israel. 6, and finally, using the fight against anti-Semitism as a cover to advance an extreme right MAGA agenda will create bitterness, not only against the Jewish community here, but against Israel and on the part of those who have been impacted by the MAGA attacks. When you snatch students off the street for expressing disagreement with Israeli policy and you cut off billions in research funding for cancer research in the name of supporting Israel, you are creating danger for the state of Israel. In sum, John, this president isn't just bad for Israel. He constitutes a clear and present danger to Israel's Jewish and democratic future.
Thank you, Jeremy. Now we move on to the discussion portion of the program, and that's where I ask questions of the debaters. They can also question one another, challenge one another, interrupt one another if it's done in good faith. And after a little while, I'll come to you for questions to take part in that conversation as well. But what I'm hearing in the opening statement is both of you focusing very much on the attitudes towards the situation between Israel and Palestine that President Trump has made clear are, at the moment, his attitudes. Fundamentally, as Einat said, it was captured in his phrase, all hell is going to break out, which he said back in several months ago when he was putting pressure on both sides to bring about a deal, but that was a warning to Hamas to give up the hostages quickly. That sort of hard line, Einat is saying, is long overdue, that the American policy traditionally has shown indulgence towards the Palestinians and their cause and their aspirations to someday take back the land that they were pushed out of. It's time for the Palestinians to accept the consequences of loss, and President Trump is emphasizing that they have lost and also seems to want them to accept those consequences. From Jeremy Ben-Ami, we're hearing that those very same attitudes represent a threat to Israel, that the president is undermining Israel's security by working to kill the aspirations and hopes of Palestinians. If that were to happen, Israel cannot really remain a democracy, which he establishes as a core value that he himself takes seriously. that Trump's politics give room to Bibi Netanyahu to continue to pursue policies that Jeremy feels are detrimental to Israel's future, that defunding aid and support in Gaza is going to deepen the despair of the Palestinian people and will further inflame extremism. And there were other points that he made that we will get to in the course of the conversation. But I'd like to, rather than a very specific question, ask each of you what you think you most fundamentally disagree about here.
Well, I would say that the attitude that this is a zero-sum conflict, that there can only be one winner and the Palestinians have to accept that they lose, that is at the core of the problem. There is no way for one side to win without what I would hope everybody would agree is an absolutely unacceptable disaster. Now, we may very well be on the edge of it, thanks to Bibi Netanyahu and Donald Trump. I mean, the things that are being talked about now in terms of just steamroller in Gaza are absolutely impossible to comprehend. I don't think that Einat recognizes the Palestinian right to self-determination in the same land. I do. And I think the only way that you solve a conflict between two peoples with legitimate claims to the exact same piece of land is to find a way for them to split it and to find some way to draw a border and find a way to compromise so that you can live next to each other forever. And I think that the formula that Einat is proposing is one where one side wins and one side loses, and I think that that is a formula for perpetual fighting, death, and bloodshed.
So it's exactly the opposite, of course. Why is it indeed a zero-sum game? I was of the belief that indeed the Palestinians are a people seeking self-determination in the land, liberty. Those are supposedly their hopes. Only to live through multiple opportunities when they had the chance to have their own state, no settlements, no occupation, capital in East Jerusalem, holy sites. I supported every Israeli prime minister that tried to do that through direct negotiations, through disengagement, only to find that again and again and again, Palestinians walk away from those proposals, follow it up with butcheries, and most important, there is no internal debate within the Palestinians about not accepting those offered. I always bring a quote from February 47 by Ernst Bevin, the British foreign minister, who explains in February 47, there is no occupation, no settlements, no BB. You know, there was such a time. No one is displaced. He says the Jews want to establish a sovereign Jewish state. Wonderful. They want to exercise the principle of self-determination in their ancestral homeland. And then he says the Arabs, their top priority is to resist to the last the establishment of Jewish sovereignty in any part of the land. By definition, zero-sum. The Jews want a state, the Arabs want the Jews not to have a state, and they have never wavered from that goal. Your goal of a two-state solution where one of the two is a Jewish state depends on the Arabs actually wanting to live next to a Jewish state, and that idea, which I've come to call Palestinianism, has to end.
All right, so I want to observe that the last 6 minutes or so we have not been debating the Trump piece of this. That's fine, because I think we needed to understand the foundation from which each debater is coming to this, but I do want to talk about the Trump aspect of it. Jeremy, it might be useful in that sense for you to talk about prior to Trump. If we're saying that Trump represents a change, prior to Trump, Biden, Clinton, Bush, Obama, was the U.S. constructive, was the U.S. working in a way that was good for Israel, and that has now stopped now that Trump is in the seat?
So I think that there's a lot of critique that one can have about the way in which the United States pursued diplomacy and its role in trying to be a mediator between the sides. The idea that the lawyer for one side really can't be the best mediator. And the United States has always been Israel's closest ally, its most staunch defender. It takes Israel's side at every turn. But that's a different question. I do think that the attitude that a Joe Biden brought, or that a Barack Obama brought, or that Bill Clinton and many of the other Republican presidents in prior years, the attitude that they brought about what was good for Israel was the understanding that a peaceful resolution of this conflict was in the best interests of Israel. That was something
and possible, because your opponent is saying it's not possible.
Oh, it's absolutely possible. I wanted to bring my opponent back up to date, that it is not February 47 right now. It is May of 2025. And for 23 years, the Arab world has had an offer on the table called the Arab Peace Initiative. It has been updated many times over the course of the last 2.5 decades. The no's of the Arab world are a fact, and Einat is right, that the Arab world for 40 years, maybe more, insisted over and over and over again, no to Israel, no to peace, no to negotiations, and they tried to wipe Israel off the map. That is historical fact. But by the year 2002, when Crown Prince Abdullah put forward as the Saudi Peace Initiative the full acceptance of Israel into the region by the entirety of the Arab League, and that was then adopted by the Arab League and became the Arab Peace Initiative. This is a different world than 1947, and the no, no, no of Khartoum is today the yes, yes, yes from the Arab world. They want Israel on side for security purposes. They want Israel on side for intelligence purposes. They want Israel on side for economic purposes. And the one thing that stands in the way of the type of accord that Einat supports, the Abraham Accord vision, the one thing that stands in the way is that the state of Israel, the government of Israel, must accept that one of the states in the region is going to be a state of Palestine. There can be a 23-state solution, but one of those states has to be Palestine.
Do you feel that Donald Trump is antagonistic to that solution?
No, I think that the interesting thing is that one day he may actually be the person that presides over this, but that is not where he is today. The Abraham Accords that were pursued in the first term were a detour around the Palestinian issue, ignoring what was the core of the conflict between Israel and its neighbors. And if you ignore that issue, if that's what Donald Trump insists on continuing to do, there will never be full regional peace.
So, again, that is, of course, not true. The Arab Peace Initiative continued the same position that said from the river to the sea. It said it in the words that have become the staple. Israel has to withdraw to the pre-67 lines, and there has to be a just solution to the refugee issue. Now, when you hear a just solution,
just and agreed,
which people thought meant that Israel had a veto, but if you looked at the Palestinian evidence and papers, they meant that whatever is agreed is not the end of claims, that they can agree to a number, but ultimately all millions of Palestinians have a right to settle inside Israel. But I want to say something about this idea of the runaround. President Trump actually proposed a Palestinian state. And I know Netanyahu doesn't like to talk about it, but Netanyahu said yes. And the Palestinians, Abu Mazen, true to their century-long policy, said no, no, and 1,000 times no. So yes, of course we're on May 2025. That's the tragedy. The tragedy is that in May 2025, the Palestinians remain as intransigent as they've been in February 47 and before, that the Jews will not have a state in any part of the land between the river to the sea.
So as you pointed out, Donald Trump in his first term recognized Jerusalem as the capital. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem. He's recognized Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, where there's now a settlement called Trump Heights in his honor. But he also has pushed back against Israel's aspirations for what to do about Iran. He put pressure on both sides to come to a ceasefire when the Bibi Netanyahu's coalition didn't want to do that. He has imposed 17% tariffs on Israeli goods, even after Israel dropped tariffs in the opposite direction. And overall, one might argue that his commitments are always transactional in nature. How reliable do you think he is in anything that he's saying at this point? 3 months ago, he was going to have the United States take over Gaza. We haven't heard much about that. How reliable is this president that you're saying is good for Israel?
I don't know. I'm reading the tea leaves. It's true. I'm reading the tea leaves like everybody else. All I have to go by is, again, the previous term, the declarations that he made. Am I concerned? Do I have those questions? Certainly. But fundamentally, if I look at the real core issues, and at least from the Israeli perspective, tariffs are not a core issue. I know for other people maybe yes, but not for us. I mean, so if I look at the real core issue, at the end of the day, as much as people like to pretend otherwise, the Jews are a tiny, I can't say tiny enough, ethnic, linguistic, national, religious minority in a region that is not exactly known for allowing unarmed minorities to survive very well. By and large, as long as there is a strong America, a strong American president who supports Israel, that is good for Israel. And I will just say that my definition of what's good for Israel is what Israelis think is good for Israel.
No, I'll just say very briefly, a strong America would be very good for Israel. And Donald Trump, through his erratic leadership and constantly shifting decision-making, eroding American economic power, eroding our standing in the world, is making America less strong and weaker, and that is not good for Israel.
Again, I look at the things that I know about. On all things that relate to how to make Israel strong, and especially how to finally get us out of this loop that we've been stuck in, that have come to call the Jews are never allowed to win, the Arabs are never allowed to lose, or at least acknowledge defeat, and they always get this message of you get a redo, try again, and therefore they try again. He at least is willing to break the mold and therefore opens a chance that we can actually have peace in the region, because the Palestinians will finally lose the only hope they ever had, which is the hope of destroying the Jewish state.
How do you know he's willing to break the mold? What's your strongest evidence that he's breaking the mold?
His previous term and the things that he said about Gaza. Look, whatever you think about the plan in Gaza, it did a couple of things. First, it forced the Arabs to respond. I love that one. Arabs said, oh no, you can't displace Gazans. Gaza is their home. And I remember thinking, oh wow, that's news. This is the first time I'm hearing of it, because for the last 75 years, you've been very busy telling us that Gaza is not your home and that you are a fifth-generation Palestine refugee who will live from the river to the sea. So you're telling me now, as a result of the American president offering this plan, that Gaza is your home? Great. Can we lock it in? This will actually promote us to having a Jewish state next to an Arab state.
Jeremy?
The fundamental point of disagreement, I think, between Einat and I is that I do recognize that the Palestinian people, over the course of the last 8 decades, were displaced from the homes that they had. That is the case.
Why
it's a fact.
Were they displaced? Why?
Because they lost.
Because they went to a stupid war with the headline
the
of no Jewish state.
The people that went to war were the neighboring Arab countries.
No, until May 1948, it was the local Arabs who went to war with the declared purpose of no Jewish state. That's why
the Jewish
they could have had an
were
Arab state next to Jewish.
The Jewish people were displaced from the land of Israel 1,800 years ago. And we wandered all over the world. And wherever we went, we longed to return to Zion. And we said next year in Jerusalem. We never gave up the dream of getting back to that home. We lost a war in 70 AD, right? This was a expulsion militarily. It's 1,800 years later, and we're still saying we have a right to return home. For Palestinians, it's much more raw. Some of them are still even alive who left their home. Not many at this point, but the generations that follow them remember where their families are from. if you tell them they don't have rights, if you tell them they don't have a future, that they don't have freedom, they will never have equality, they will never have justice, then they will never give up the fight. And that is a formula for undermining Israel's long-term security and its place in the world and its relationship to the American Jewish community. That is the future they're condemned to if you insist on saying they have to lose and give up.
No. They were repeatedly, this is exactly West Plaining, they were repeatedly given the chance to realize self-determination in their own state.
I'm going to step in because we are kind of going in circles on the same topic.
That's what I do in my career.
I understand this is I understand this is the key issue. I want to talk about the Donald Trump piece of it more. And I'm going to Jeremy not because I'm taking a side, but he laid out a series of reasons that he said to Trump, and you have one reason, and we've explored it. But he talked about that the United States is losing disrespect in the world, generally speaking, not in relation to Israel or Gaza, but just generally speaking, and that his behavior, having Trump in office, is bad for Israel because he's losing respect for the world, the ability, I assume, to marshal alliances, things like that, I think is what he's implying. He also says his anti-democratic behavior at home gives license to Bibi Netanyahu to act in undemocratic ways. And as we know, there have been protests going on for 2 years in Israel over moves by his government that many Israelis consider anti-democratic. And that all of that stuff comes back to a Trump who's bad for Israel. What's your response to that?
Okay, the last one is easy. Netanyahu does whatever he wants, regardless of Trump. Like, whatever he wants.
You don't think he has impact? You don't think he was able to stop? He's not able to put pressure on Israel not to move against Iran?
No, you mean in terms of within the domestic issues? That's not because Trump is in office or not. It started before him. If he were not in office tomorrow, I don't think that would make a difference.
Okay, stop. I want to get you respond to that point, and I'll.
Well, I think that the fact that Joe Biden was telling Netanyahu it was unacceptable to pursue the undercutting of the courts, and the fact that there was leadership coming from this country saying that a strong democracy is fundamental to the U.S.-Israel relationship, which has always been grounded in shared interests and values.
Okay, so one point that Jeremy did not bring up is that the president is not on the same page with Netanyahu when it comes to military action against Iran. Is that good or bad for Israel, or does it not matter?
He laid out a very clear vision, which I think is good. The vision is Iran needs to dismantle its nuclear program completely. He prefers to reach that through an agreement. He keeps the military option one in case that there's no agreement. I actually think it's the right policy to pursue.
It was the right policy when Barack Obama pursued it, and that's how we reached the JCPOA. And, you know, who's the president that blew it up? Who's the president? Trump blew up the JCPOA. That was when Iran's nuclear program was contained in a box and under international monitoring. Why is Iran racing toward a nuclear weapon? Why is Israel under the threat of the Iranian nuclear program? It's because of Donald Trump having blown up the JCPOA. I forgot that. Reason number 7 that
Again, under the previous American president, this is when the worst attack happened. We know, and everything was prepared to bring Israel to its knees. And we know that the Palestinians really started in earnest to prepare that attack when they were emboldened by these various actions, being refunded, having the resources to do it, knowing that they will have the money. The American president.
Where did that money come from? The money came from cash in suitcases that Netanyahu allowed to go through Ben Gurion Airport from Qatar. That had nothing to do with Joe Biden. I can't let you say that Joe Biden bears any responsibility for the attack on October 7th. There is one man who is responsible, who has refused to take responsibility, and that's Bibi Netanyahu. It has nothing to do with Joe Biden.
No, sorry. As much as I don't like the guy, the attack was clearly the work of the Palestinians, believing that they will be supported by Hezbollah, by Iran. And we know that Israel came closest to being at a moment of destruction because the Palestinians were emboldened and indulged to believe that Israel is weak.
Let me ask you to play out the scenario that you hope is possible if Trump is true to his position. He stays with all hell will break loose. He gives the Palestinian side no quarter whatsoever. Where do you think we are as a result of that kind of leadership in 10 years? And where are the Palestinians?
If Palestinianism and its four core tenets are finally brought to an end, what we have are Arabs who are no longer obsessively against the establishment of a Jewish state, and then you can have every possible solution. Another Arab state in the West Bank and Gaza, you can have 7 Emirates, they can join Egypt and Jordan if they want to.
How much do you think a position, Donald Trump holding that position, matters to that happening? Why?
Because the reason we're stuck for the last century is that the Palestinians have been constantly indulged in a redo, in being told you can try again. But not just by the
United States in your argument. I mean, it's the United Nations.
The United States is a massive player, and if it's able also to bring other Arab countries that are finally understanding that anti-Zionism, to use the colorful language of this president, is the ideology of losers, of failed societies, of societies in crisis that seek scapegoats.
Okay. Just to, again, in the interest of time, we have to go to questions. I just want to let you respond to that. And the fundamental question being, in 10 years, if Donald Trump's policy now, he loses office in 2 years, and we understand, but if his policy now holds firm and the full support for Bibi Netanyahu, et cetera, where is the situation in 10 years and where are the Palestinians?
Well, I think that if we go down the road that it appears the cabinet has just approved in Israel, which is really to flatten most of Gaza, push millions of people into a tiny area in the south and have 5 tents where people can pick up 44-pound packages of food, I think we're in a really bad place. I'd call it hell on earth. I think that this is the formula for Israel becoming absolutely isolated around the world, an absolute pariah state. And I think that this path leads it to isolation and exclusion and losing its character.
Enabling a pariah state is what your opponent is saying Donald Trump is saying.
That's what everyone told us would happen last time, and what happened was exactly the opposite. We got 4 peace and normalization agreements with a momentum for more, and he makes it clear that the Jewish state is here to stay. He is more likely to bring Arabs and Palestinians to finally say, fine, we're going to let go of our constant obsession with trying to let the Jewish state go.
The deals that were cut with Morocco, UAE, Bahrain, and Sudan,
which are to his credit.
Which are to his credit. They are good, solid business deals. Everybody got something out of it. They can't be called peace deals because there was never war between Israel and any of those countries. The conflict Israel has isn't with Morocco and Bahrain. The conflict that the Jewish people have about the land of Israel is with the Palestinian people who also live there. That's the conflict. You cannot solve that conflict by making business deals with countries that are thousands of miles away and engage in terrific cooperation on security and intelligence and other matters, but do not get to the heart of the challenge to the survival of the state of Israel as a Jewish democracy, which is that you have to have a state for the Palestinian people next to Israel.
Okay, I need to go to questions now.
I'm Courtney Keeley. Thank you both. Thank you. My question is moving on whether Trump is good for Israel in recent days, in recent weeks. We've seen him unilaterally announce a U.S.-Iran peace deal without actually talking about full dismantlement and the Libyan model. It looks like with Waltz out, that's gone. We've now seen him announce that there's a peace deal or some kind of deal with the Houthis without Israel being involved, with Israel actually being surprised by that announcement and also involved in being attacked at Ben Gurion and responding against the Sana'a airport in Yemen. So we are looking at unilateral moves by the U.S., taking it out out of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict into the greater conflict of the Middle East. This kind of decision-making or announcements, is this what Trump is doing that's good for Israel?
Again, it's all very new. I don't know. All I can say is on the Houthis, at least, there's been more action, whereas the Biden administration, I think, even kind of not true to the roles of securing the waterways, did nothing. At least now there's some action. But again, as far as I'm concerned, and I think most Israelis, if he can get Iran and the Houthis to calm down, that would be great. We need to, again, not lose sight, and that's also, again, with the Palestinianism. The ideology of the regime in Iran, and this is where Obama failed, ultimately has been death to Israel, death to America. The American president seems to be willing at least to do something about it. I'll wait.
That kind of erratic behavior, the unpredictability, never knowing what you're going to wake up to the next day, is exactly what is weakening America in the world. And a weaker America is not good for Israel.
And I felt the other part of that question is that the administration is making decisions about Israel without Israel in certain situations, and that would be not the way that you act in a way that is good. Now, I understand, I'm not saying that the outcomes are good for Israel, but what about the process?
I think it's absolutely fine for the United States to pursue its own national interests. I don't think that you have to check everything with Israel. I think that is a part of the problem with the way that the United States has approached its policy in the Middle East for decades under Republican and Democratic presidents.
Melinda Ahrens, big fan of both of yours. I've never nodded so vociferously to both sides after each and every point, which means it's a great debate. My question, I want to take it a little bit more narrow. Not just is Trump good for Israel, but specifically is Trump good for the hostages, or if we're going to see the status quo be upheld. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would start by giving him credit for something, because I don't want to seem like anything he does is bad. The fact that Steve Witkoff participated with the Biden team in the course of November and December and January, and they worked hand in glove and they worked really well together, is to the credit of Trump and of his team. And the ceasefire that did happen, the only way that hostages come out alive or dead has been through negotiations, through ceasefires. Military action, which is being promised as the way to end this and achieve everything, has not succeeded in bringing home the hostages. If your number one concern is the hostages, which it is for 2/3 of Israelis, when they're asked, do you want total victory over Hamas or do you want to bring the hostages home? It's 2-1 in favor of the hostages. And that will have to be through a negotiated agreement. And this concept of total victory, if Trump is enabling that, that is a bad thing.
If I may, Hamas, in kidnapping people, did something unprecedented in the history of Palestinian kidnappings. This time, they didn't kidnap people from their beds on a Shabbat morning merely to exchange them for butcher and murderers in Israeli jails. They did it very strategically so that at the end of this process, they will get a redo. That Gaza's territory will remain essentially the same, they will remain in power, and the billions of dollars will go back to flowing so that they will continue and will be able to send the dramatic message that we did that to Israel and we paid no price. And the dilemma is real. And Hamas has not budged. And by the way, it has not budged because too many have normalized on October 8th that Israel has to negotiate for the hostages.
Are you saying, on Ms. Aaron's question, is Trump good or bad for the hostages?
Trump might be better because he might finally give Israel leverage, which the Biden administration did not, allowing Israel to take territory, allowing Israel to move people, allowing Israel to not give supplies. We know from previous deals that those were the elements of pressure that pushed to a deal. And when those levers were taken from Israel, it became almost impossible. The fact that the American president is at least allowing Israel to have more leverage is hopefully better.
If you can stand and tell your name, please.
Hi, Batu Kutelia. I'm from Georgia. So let me zoom out a little bit. And one of the things that has not been touched, which is not elephant, but maybe bear in the room, is Russia. So Trump-Putin's relations, how it will affect the the possibility of Putin manipulating Middle East Gaza problem against hurting U.S. interests?
So, I mean, my view on this is that the Jewish people have had 7 to 8 decades now of the most successful, prosperous, secure existence that they've had in the history of the Jewish people in 2 Western-style democracies, Israel and the United States. The democratic system is a system that worked really well for us as a small people in this country and as a way of organizing Israel into a successful country that does within its borders recognize the rights of minorities. If the world is moving in a direction that Trump seems to want to take it in, where the Viktor Orbáns and the Erdogans and the Xis and the Putins are determining the world order, and we're moving away from liberal democracy, we're moving away from the rule of law, we're moving away from protection of minorities, this is not a good thing for the Jewish people as a whole. And so I would argue that the cozying up to Putin and to dictators more broadly, this authoritarianism obsession that the president has, is yet another aspect of why he is not good for Israel.
I have a question. For some decades, the United States has been providing for up to $4 billion a year to Israel, most of it in military aid, most of that military aid in the form of contracting in the United States, but nevertheless, the money's fungible. But would Trump be doing Israel a favor to cut that to zero, or would Trump be doing Israel a favor to increase it a lot?
Ideally, he would be doing Israel a great favor by bringing it down and allowing Israel to finally develop its arms industry. The American funding of Israel's kind of military has been much of a bear hug. In many ways, it started when America realized that Israel is a bit too successful in defeating Arab and Soviet-funded armies, that it needs to bring it under control. As a result, it killed a lot of Israel's local defense industry, the aircrafts, and in many ways limited Israeli defense to what fits American interests. We saw it most clearly, and Israelis are now feeling that very viscerally, that we woke up on October 7th to realize that we were way too dependent on American arms. And I think another way in which President Trump could be good for Israel is that since he seems to appreciate capable allies, he might actually allow us to be to be freer in having our arms industry, develop it, to be independent, and to be able to defend ourselves. I think that would be a great outcome for Israel.
I can't wait to call up Rashida Tlaib and tell her that she has an ally in Einat Wilf for cutting U.S. aid to Israel. Because God forbid a Democrat in the United States would stand up and say what Einat just said, and that it would be actually, a good thing for Israel. I think that's what you're saying. It would be a good thing for Israel.
I'm an Israeli.
Yeah, and it would be a good thing for Israel if the United States would begin to lower the amount of money that it gives to Israel. So we can use that as validation here for those who are in favor of doing that. I, on the other hand, see a real benefit to the United States through the maintenance of a very significant U.S. Provision of support for the security assistance of Israel. I do think that security assistance needs to be provided under the terms of American law. And for instance, there is a provision of American law that says that a recipient of security assistance cannot prohibit or inhibit the delivery of humanitarian assistance into a war zone where those arms are being used. That is American law. And that law is being violated. And that law needs to be enforced. And it should be enforced on everyone, not just on Israel. I'm not talking about singling out Israel. This is a law for all recipients of our aid. And so I do think we should provide aid, but I think we should be ensuring that it's being used in a way that accords with our laws.
All right, we're going to move to our closing. We're going to move to our closing round now, and our closing round is comprised of each of our debaters making their closing statements. And Einat, you are up first for that. Once again, you are arguing yes in answer to the question, is Trump good for Israel? You're saying yes, and your last chance to tell us why.
So a few weeks ago, I was at a conference in Paris about how to make peace. And I don't know if you watched the movie Back to the Future, but you remember the moment that Marty begins to understand that he's in the 50s. He goes into the diner, he sees the paper, he understands he's in the 50s. When I attended that conference, it quickly dawned on me that we're in the 90s. They kept on talking about, go back to the negotiating table, you need to discuss a two-state solution, as if nothing had happened. And at one point, the moderator, a European, asked, how can the EU help you? And I don't know what's your experience, but often when Europeans ask that, they ask it in the very smug tone of how can we enlightened Europeans living in peace help you savages resolve your issues? And I told her, you know what? What would really be nice if the EU actually remembered how it became the EU. It was not because you sat at the table and negotiated. It was because there were a few ruthless leaders who understood that the ideology that brought so much destruction has to unconditionally surrender. They understood that Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan had to unconditionally surrender, be occupied, denazified, and then the EU could come about through negotiations. And I told her, that's what I want for my region, nothing else. That the ideology of Palestinianism, this singular obsession with the non-existence of a Jewish state that has brought so much destruction to our people, to everyone, that ideology must die so that Jews and Arabs can finally live in peace. And if the American president can be the ruthless leader that finally makes it clear that the ideology of Palestinianism must die, then I really, really hope that that's what he'll be, because that's what our people need and deserve, for an ideology of destruction to die so that the people of the region might finally live.
And Jeremy Ben-Ami, you get the last word, your closing statement, and once again, you are arguing no, Trump is not good for Israel.
Thank you, John. So my father's family came to Israel in the 1800s fleeing the Russian pogroms, and they arrived then in what was Ottoman Palestine. My father's birth certificate says Palestine on it. 90% of the population when they arrived was Arab. I believe that my family and all of the Jews who have returned to Israel in the last 140 years and have become Israeli citizens have a legitimate claim to self-determination in that land, in the land of Israel. It is grounded in thousands of years of Jewish history. It has nothing to do with this theory of settler colonialism. But I also recognize, unlike Einat and the Israeli right, that the people who were living there when my family arrived and returned after 1,800 years, that those people also have a legitimate right to live in that land. While the Jewish people yearned and longed for a return to Israel for those 1,800 years, and they never gave up that desire to return home, the Palestinian people have only been living in their diaspora for less than 8 decades. Both these peoples have legitimate claims to the exact same small piece of land. And either they will agree to share the land, or there will be more death and more bloodshed, as we have seen for the last 18 months, for generations to come. A president who is good for Israel is one who uses his power to find a comprehensive solution to the conflict. Simply telling Israel it can do what it wants and take what it can is in the long run bad for Israel. It will make the country less secure. It will make it impossible for it to be a democracy, and over time it will no longer be Jewish, not just demographically, but spiritually. I salute the presidents who gave peacemaking their all. Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, the Bushes. Unfortunately, President Trump is leading in the exact opposite direction by giving Netanyahu and the extreme right the green light to pursue their vision of total victory and Einat's hope of essentially beating the Palestinians' nationalism out of them. He is paving a path to Israel losing its security, its place in the democratic world, and ultimately its Jewish soul. And that is not good for Israel.
So, I was going to prompt a handshake as a bit of stagecraft at the end of my remarks, but I'm really pleased to see that the both of you did that spontaneously, because that's the kind of thing that we want to encourage and demonstrate is doable, and we've had a pleasure here at the Council on Foreign Relations. And I'm going to wrap by saying my name is John Donvan. We'll see you next time as they shake hands.